Sounds
So
brilliant.
you're the pioneering speaker in this, what I hope will be a very interesting and long series of webinar meetings between members of Wallasey CLP and our front bench. And it's an absolute delight to have you be our inaugural speaker.
Thank you.
And it's and I'd just like, what I'm going to do is introduce you very quickly, but I think the thing then is for you to give us your observations and thoughts about what's been going on with the coronavirus epidemic. And obviously you have a particular expertise as a doctor on the front line as well. Make some comments, if you would, about your front bench position, but then I'm going to open it up to questions. And what I'm hoping to be able to do is cue people in so they will magically appear to ask their questions. I'm hoping to have this meeting also last for an hour and hopefully have about half an hour, Rosena, if possible, of Q&A, so that as many members as possible, if they wish, can get involved in asking you a question. So many thanks for coming. All of you will know Rosena was one of the stars of the Labour leadership election. She went around the country impressing many people, and I know you had good support from members in Wallasey CLP. So it's a delight to have you here, and over to you.
Oh, brilliant. Well, thank you so much, Angela, and first of all, Wallasey CLP are so lucky to have you. You actually made me feel incredibly welcome when I came in on a by-election, not actually terribly long ago, in 2016, and it was a very unique place to be in Parliament at a very unique time. And not being a career politician, I didn't really know certain parts of my body from my elbow, and you and Anne-Maria were always there to offer me a superbly helping hand, guiding me through what was a very difficult time. So thank you for that. And you know, Wallasey, you are lucky. You have somebody who has been in the Labour Party, a stalwart on the benches, fighting for your community for the longest time. So absolutely brilliant to be here, and I'm proud to call you a friend, Angela. And how exciting, it's the inaugural one, so no pressure then, but I thought what I would do is just talk you a bit through my journey throughout the coronavirus pandemic, because I think in that you will learn some things about what it was like working on the front line, but you probably also get an understanding of where I saw the government failing time and time again in some of that timeline. So yes, I was knee deep, no, waist deep, neck deep in the deputy leadership competition, and having the time of my life, getting more members to know me once I realised that only 5% of membership knew me. So I was going around the country, and then all of a sudden this coronavirus pandemic hit. I stopped all campaigning and I went back to my local hospital, St George's, to work on the front line, and I did some shifts there, but then I was asked by colleagues to go to the Nightingale in London and work there as part of the family support liaison team. And I must admit, I've had many years of being a doctor, and I've had over a decade of being a humanitarian doctor, and I honestly thought I'd seen it all, and I dealt with a lot of my own personal grief and trauma and you know, how you deal with things as a professional. But I don't think anything could have prepared me for what I experienced. And firstly, it was the pure fear of frontline NHS and care workers. Never before had people gone to work in droves, fearing for their own lives. And we are outliers. We are outliers here. When we look around Europe in terms of the number of deaths that we've had due to coronavirus, the state of our economy, but so tragically in the number of healthcare workers who have lost their lives. So for me, being around colleagues who were scared, whose families were saying to them, Mum, please don't go to work. Dad, please don't go to work. You know, phoning ahead so that my own children didn't run towards me on Mother's Day when I got home from a shift because I knew I might have this virus on me. This feeling was really crippling for staff. And not having the PPE that they needed was causing a significant breakdown in people's mental health. And as we know, so many people went on to contract the virus, and so many people unfortunately died trying to save our lives, trying to keep us safe. And I'll talk a bit about what happened at the Nightingale, because I was part of the team that was the go-between between people in the intensive care who were fighting for their lives and the family members who weren't allowed to see them, weren't allowed to hold them or talk to them, who were just gripped by fear of what was going to happen, and their whole lives had been turned upside down. And that would involve phoning family members every single day and talking through what was going on with their loved one, talking through the numbers, explaining what the oxygen levels meant, promising to take messages to their bedside, and being told things like, can you please tell dad to hold on because the grandkids really miss him? Can you please tell dad to keep fighting? And then going to the intensive care and relaying those messages, it was just heartbreaking. And also, like, there was something really stark about going into the intensive care, because we've all heard about how our BAME communities have been hit. We've all heard about how those, like, from the most like, deprived areas, like, regardless of their ethnicity, were the worst hit. But when you walked into the intensive care at the Nightingale, it was all there in Technicolor. You could see it was the poorest of families. It was our BAME community. It was the people who had gone to work at the supermarket checkouts, had continued driving the buses, who had continued delivering the letters, the people that our country rely on the most to stay afloat. Those were the ones in the beds. And heartbreaking though it was, when somebody was going to die, we had to phone the families and tell them that news. And if they weren't self-isolating or shielding for whatever reason, they were allowed to come to the hospital, where we would, in full PPE, I would have to have brutally honest conversations with family members and choose one out of sometimes 5 or 6 people to go with me into the intensive care to say goodbye. And that for me was one of the hardest things I think I've ever had to do in my career. Not to be able to hold someone, to touch their arm, to share in their grief with them, but to stand 2 meters away in full PPE, trying to tell them that in some way I understood their pain, and then picking one family member and watching them agonizing over who was going to go in and be able to say goodbye to their loved one. And then going into that intensive care and just being with them as they said goodbye, and then holding a phone so the other family members could speak to them, was just, it left me quite disturbed, actually. And there were many times I would go home and I would go home in tears. And the reason I'd be in tears was because deep down, I just knew that this was avoidable. And I think struggling with that put the fire in my belly to come up with the Care for Carers package, which was Labour's package of mental health support for our frontline NHS and care workers. And what was really, I think, really typified the government response to the pandemic is when I tried to take a message to Matt Hancock in May, and I brought a message from frontline workers, just asking for an acknowledgement that he understood that many of them felt that they were tearing families apart in grief, and some of that could have been prevented, only to have him school me on my tone. And I know that Angela knows what it's like, having a Tory posh boy try to tell her what to do with herself in the House of Commons. But it just said everything.
Calm down, dear.
Yeah, calm down, dear. I mean, it's quite ridiculous, and that is the world we're still operating in. But to know that these people that have this attitude of taking the greatest decisions for our country's health was just, quite frankly, a scandal. And I just thought to myself, the number of deaths, the people who are grieving, this is a national scandal. It is. And obviously, I then did an FOI asking them, asking the government how many, mental health organisations, trusts, charities had they met with in the first 3 months of lockdown. The answer was flat 0. And the Care for Carers package that we put together as a Labour Party, ready to go to provide the much needed mental health support for our frontline NHS and care staff, saying that everybody is equal. It's not only important if you are a doctor or a nurse, if you are a porter, if you are a receptionist, if you are a cleaner, you have gone in every single day to bat. You have had difficult conversations with families. You yourself have been grieving. Everybody deserves to have the mental health support that they need. I took that to the government, asked time and time again if they would work cross-party with me, flatly refused. And the most recent answer that I got from my counterpart, Nadine Dorris, was that if we wanted to help inform policy, we should try harder at the next election. Well, we will, comrades. We're going to win the next election. And then we're going to be able to put all the policies we want in place to protect our communities, to protect the people of Wallasey, Merseyside. We are going to make sure that you come first, and we're going to do this together. But until the next election, we have a fight on our hands. We have a fight for our local council seats. We have a fight for our mayors. We have a fight for our communities. And I have the absolute honour of having the portfolio for mental health. And in fact, I asked Keir for that, because I think that, quite frankly, this government do not take mental health seriously. All that parity of esteem and warm words and we care, they don't. And without a healthy nation, without a mentally and psychologically well nation, we can never have a thriving economy. We can't have our children go on and fulfill their potentials. We can't have people live meaningful, happy lives. And when I look at what some of the priorities are going forward for what I would really like to do with the role, obviously we are in the midst of the coronavirus pandemic at the moment, and so of course I've been pushing for support for frontline health and care workers. But I've also been working with colleagues in other departments, because we know that our schools are crying out for help. Our head teachers are on their knees, and I hope that some of you will ask questions later, and maybe some of you watching are teachers. But I know you've been having such a difficult time. We know that our university students, we know actually that that Merseyside has many students living there, a really active student population, and so many of them have been suffering. And I also have had the honour of doing some virtual visits and seeing though how there is incredible work in your community, incredible work on mental health. But going forward, some of the priorities that I have, firstly, it's about fighting the stigma of suffering with mental ill health. We hear about this stigma thing all the time. Oh, must have less stigma, must talk about it more, it's okay not to be okay. But it's not really, is it? How many people now watching this feel as though they could pick up the phone and phone their boss at work and say, I'm really sorry, I can't come in today, I feel really anxious, or I feel really sad and I can't get out of bed, or I'm worried that I'm drinking a bit too much? No, most people will still pick up the phone and say, I can't come into work today, I've got a bad, like a bad belly, I've got, diarrhea and vomiting, or I've got the flu. We don't live in a world yet where we have true parity of esteem. And I've been working a lot with our absolutely incredible unions on this, speaking to them. And so many of them tell me that what they really need is to have the acceptance of something like a mental health charter within the workplace, something that actually makes it mandatory for workplaces to sign, to actually sign up to something. Do you know that there is a disproportionate number of suicides in construction workers? Construction workers most often feel that if they phone up and say anything about their mental health, that they fear never getting the next contract. That leads me on to my next thing, suicide. In fact, people in the sector don't like that word. They actually prefer people to say taking their own lives. As far as I'm concerned, any life lost to taking your own life, it could have been prevented. And we know that suicide rates are going up, regardless of what the government say. We know that people are suffering immeasurably. And we know that young men particularly are disproportionately affected. So what can we do together collectively to make people know that it's okay not to be okay, and provide them that help and support? So that is something that I am tackling head on through working with colleagues all across the different sectors of the workplace, all across the different shadow departments. And also, one of the greatest drivers of mental ill health are adverse childhood experiences and health inequalities. We've got those everywhere. They're everywhere. They're all over the country. Thanks to the Tories, they're in every single community. There is no community that is immune from health inequalities. So it's about working in my capacity in the health team, working with the housing team, working with the local government team, working with the education team, say what can we do collectively to come up with policies that are from the grassroots up, tackling the root of health inequality. Why is it that a young black man is most likely to be diagnosed with mental ill health when he's already in the judicial system? We have to address the structural inequalities that exist. So I've got some big projects going on over the next few months, and I need your help. So, you know, Wallasey CLP, I need your help. I want to hear your ideas. I want to hear your vision, because, you know, I have this role for the Labour Party, but I can only do this with your help and support. I can only do this when Angela organises incredible things like tonight and says, you know, come and talk to us. Hear what our actual real lived experiences are. So that's what I hope we can talk about tonight. I'm really open to hearing any of your ideas and suggestions. And I know some of you may want to know, but I'm still working in the NHS. I go and I'm doing shifts as often as I can. Lately, they've been so short-staffed where I am at St George's. They've really been needing people. So I've been going in like most weekends and doing like a late shift or a weekend shift. And of course, it does take its toll, but it enables me to really feel what's going on the ground. And what's going on the ground is that people are suffering. There are children who are coming in with like repeated chest infections because they're living in damp accommodation. There are people coming in with mental health crises because they cannot access the services that they need. And there are people coming in because they have a government that, quite frankly, don't care. But we're planning on changing that. We're going to get Labour into government in 2024, and we're going to start tonight here with some amazing discussions about how we could do that. Thank you so much for having me.
Rosena, thank you very much. And for those of you on the webinar, if you've got questions to ask, some of you are doing it already, and you're obviously very savvy with this stuff, but please type them in the Q&A section. What we're going to try to do, we're going to try to be very sophisticated. And when I call people up, we're going to hope that we can actually make them conjure them up so that you can see them, Rosena, and they can ask their question in person. I'm going to start with a couple of questions that are about some of the topics you've been talking about, but then questions can range as wide as people want them to. So, ask about anything. So first I'm going to ask Brian, who hopefully will come up now to ask his question. Brian? He's kind of appeared.
Yeah. Angela, can you hear me?
We can hear you, but we can't see you. But anyway, hearing you is better than nothing.
Somebody said I'm better when you can't see me. I'm not sure how to change that.
I don't believe that for a second.
And it's not true. Brian, just ask a question.
I'll just ask anyway. First of all, Rosena, thanks very much for coming along tonight. It's great to see you. My question specifically is that I had my COVID test in Wallasey on Monday. No problem at all. But I still speak to many people who are very cynical and very unsure about whether even to have the COVID test. I suspect a lot of that is borne out by a basic distrust of the way government have held and looked after the whole issue. But what more can we do to try and persuade people that it's in everybody's interest that as many people as possible to get the test done? Thank you very much.
Brian. And we have been given lateral flow tests just to let you into the situation locally, Rosena. We were not part of the Liverpool pilot, which is the mass testing, but we have been given a big supply, and they've been started to be rolled out. I think 1,000, nearly 2,000 have been done. Meanwhile, we've gone from tier 3 down to tier 2, and I think we're at 60 per 100,000 infection rates now, which is far, far better than the close to 400 that we were at when we were in tier 3. So, Rosena, over to you.
Yeah, so that's really interesting. I mean, first of all, thank you to everybody who has done their best in these very difficult times to adhere to the rules. And I think it's a real testament to our communities. But I think one of the inherent issues with testing and why people are reluctant to take it up is, imagine if you are in insecure work and we know that the government hasn't provided the financial support to go hand in hand with self-isolating. If you are found to be asymptomatic with COVID, what are you going to do? You've got a family of 5 to feed, you know, totally reliant on your earnings. You're going to take this test, find out that you've got COVID, and sit at home and not have any financial support, not be able to feed your family. So the thing that I hear most is that people often are reluctant to take the test because they're so worried about the outcome of having a positive result and what that will mean for them and their families with regards to employment. The other thing is as well, I think we can sort of collectively make the case that it's not about doing things for ourselves, but it's about keeping others safe and making sure that we amplify that message that when we wear a mask, when we take a test, we're doing this for our neighbour, we're doing this for our friends, we're doing it to keep other people safe. But I think what is so difficult as well is the way the government have handled this over the last 9 months. People have lost trust. People have absolutely lost trust in the process. So whereas it breaks my heart to think that people aren't taking the tests, one can understand why they are reluctant. And it's about working with that and understanding that people aren't bad, they're just scared. They just want to feed their kids and they don't trust the government. So once we know that, it's about working with messages that help and support them through that narrative.
Great. And next up is Terry. I know you've got a question, Terry. Let's see if we can call you up.
Yes, I'm on the board of a local charity, the Lonsdale Trust, and they provide daycare for people with dementia and that kind of thing. And of course, they've been closed all year since March. And I can't imagine what it'd be like to have to care for people like this. And I'm just wondering, I know this has been a unique kind of year, but how can this be remedied in the future, in the long term? What can be done?
Yeah, thank you.
This whole issue with dementia and social care is a really important issue. We've got a very large number of social care homes in Wirral itself, and quite a lot of problems, particularly in the first wave with closures and deaths there. So I think this has been one of the most difficult areas of response to the virus, what's been happening in care homes.
Yeah, it's been absolutely heartbreaking. And Terry, thank you so much for your question and all that you do for the Lonsdale Trust. It has been an unprecedented time. And in fact, just today, because I really believe that my role is to work hand in hand with many of my cross-departmental colleagues, I was in fact having a meeting with Liz Kendall about what we can do to support carers who care for the people in care homes, people themselves who are suffering with things like dementia, and other issues, and their families. And I don't mind being very open about the fact that my dad has dementia and he's in a care home, and it has been bitterly, eye-wateringly painful not to be able to be with him and to hold him and to hug him. And sometimes we've stood across the road and he's looked through a fence and we can see him crying, and it's that decision about do you bother going at all because you don't want them to cry, but then you don't want them to feel completely forgotten. And I think it's really important actually that we provide mental health support, and that was what the meeting was about today, how we provide support for people at every level of that relationship. So the carers who are being families to those who can't have their families visit them, people themselves who just can't understand what is happening and what's gone on, they will need extra intensive support. But for people who are unable to see their loved ones, for people who have been married for 50 years, who are unable to see their partner, this has had a huge effect, and I think has been one of the greatest scandals of this whole pandemic, the way our older generations have been written off. I mean, I could talk about this all day, but that narrative of, well, if you're over 70, just stay indoors and wait for it all to go away, and then you can come out again. No, I think it should have been, we all stay inside for a certain time of the day, and everybody over 70 and shielding can go out for a walk. That sort of non-acceptance that if you are old, over a certain age, that you have a value in life. It's been awful from this government, and I think it's the same with care homes. And so what I think, Terry, we need to learn the lessons in terms of from this is a strategy that would be implemented immediately were this ever to happen again. But this is one of the most heartbreaking scandals of the absolute whole pandemic, and I'm really grateful you've raised it. Thank you.
Great. And of course, there is an issue with the charity sector that they've lost out on so much fundraising.
So much money.
They'll survive at all in a lot of cases, and in this case, we just don't know what damage is going to be done. So I have a question from a young member who would like to ask now.
Angela, it's James. It's not Alistair. I think it's come up wrong.
Oh right,
James,
are you right? Have you got a question to ask?
Oh, I thought I'd changed my name, but obviously it didn't. It's still got Alistair's name. Hello, Rosena. I wanted to ask, what actually happened with Nadine in the end? Did she actually let you negotiate about the improving mental health services for NHS workers, or did you just make stupid political points and not bother to contact you again?
Yeah, no, that was.
I think we might all know the answer to that, but over to you.
Answers on a postcard. I'm not sure if you are referring to the video where I asked her 8 times. I basically asked her very politely, and as I could see she was getting more wound up, I just kept asking her. It was in a debate, and I honestly think mental health shouldn't be a political football. It really shouldn't. If the government, had a good idea, I would stand behind it. But at the end of the day, we just want the outcome to be that the people that need our help get it, and I don't mind who takes the credit for it. But what I haven't got time for, what I think is an absolute abomination, and I will call out all day, every day, is when you offer to work cross-party on an issue that is so important and you don't get a response. And so in this debate, basically, I asked her very nicely if she would meet with me to discuss the Care for Carers package. It actually wasn't the first time that I'd asked, and she kept on huffing and puffing and rolling her eyes and growling and jumping up. And so I just kept on asking her, and then she stood up. I took an intervention. She gave a response. I said, well, I take that as a no then. And then she kept on, anyway, this went on, and it was 8 times in total that I asked her very politely. And then she basically stood up and said, like playing to the baying Tories behind her, who thought it was very funny. She said, basically, if the honourable lady wants to decide policy, then she needs to try harder to get into government and do better at the next election. And I just thought that says everything about how the government value mental health. And then obviously I put this, I put the video out, and it went viral, and people were outraged. So needless to say, when we were opposite each other at a debate 2 days later, it was slightly frosty. But no, she's not met me yet. But still we carry on.
That's great. And remember, if you've got a question to ask Rosena, please stick it in the Q&A, and we'll try to magic you up so that you can ask the question yourself. We have a question now from Colin.
Can you hear me?
Yes,
Hi,
Colin,
Colin,
that's
we can
fine.
hear you.
Yes, my question is that the government's recently announced a pay freeze for public sector workers, apart from health service workers and those working for the civil service under 25,000 a year, which is kind of a narking situation for civil servants on the basis that they have been the very people keeping government going throughout the coronavirus period, and will still keep going for the next 6 months or more. They've achieved huge amounts of increase in claims for universal credit and other support systems, and they have gone out of their way to work hard. PCS has actually achieved a 100,000 signature petition, which provides for debate in the Commons before Christmas. I'm just wondering if, for both of you, whether you'll both be integral to that debate to raise the issues of civil servant pay, given that it's now going to be the 11th year of pay restraint for civil servants.
Yeah.
Thank you, Colin. Just explain on this is a technical issue just to be aware of, that when the petitions committee finds a petition that's got more than 100,000 signatures, that means that there has to be a debate in Westminster Hall, and debates in Westminster Hall have just been restarted. Because of the coronavirus pandemic, we're doing things slightly differently in the Commons chamber, as you might have noticed, and also in Westminster Hall. And it means you have to put in for almost a pre-lottery in order to get to speak. And only certain people, there's an element of luck in that. So we can't just walk into debates like we used to be able to. We have to apply and get lucky. But I just throw that in so that you understand the context. But anyway, Rosena.
Yeah, and I mean, firstly, what an abomination again for them to actually do that. And I think what is particularly cheeky is playing, just absolutely playing off one set of public sector workers against the other. And I think to give a well, not to give a pay freeze to NHS workers, but to give it to everybody else, really was game playing of the highest order. And of course, I mean, civil servants are the ones keeping our country going, and many of them have been suffering with their mental health. And you're absolutely right about, universal credit needs going up in that group. But I, personally, because I'm in the shadow cabinet, I am not allowed to speak on an issue that isn't to do with mental health unless I'm closing that debate. But if you want to write to me, I'm very happy to do a written question, and you sound like you'll know exactly what that means, but I'm very happy to do a written question to the government to ask them if they're taking into account the mental health of our civil service and our civil servants when they are yet again freezing their pay. Do they understand the knock-on effect that has on their mental health? I'm very happy to submit a question. So if you would like to drop me an email, my team will take that up.
Great. And I wondered, Rosena, whether you might give us your views on how much of a breakthrough the vaccine is and how likely you think, as a medical doctor, it will be that we can get back to normal sometime next year. I'm sort of thinking around summerish, if they manage to do this huge vaccination program. What are your thoughts?
Yeah, well, I'm really excited that we have a vaccine. I mean, I really am. It is good news, and I think it is a ray of hope. How it gets rolled out is the thing that we're really going to have to scrutinise as a Labour Party, that it's fair, that it's timely, and I understand, and in fact I've actually commented on it when I've been on various media programmes when I've been asked, that the trust is not there at the moment from the public. There are a huge number of people who, because it's a new vaccine, are very reluctant to take it up. But what I would say is that there has been research into coronavirus vaccines for a great number of years. And actually COVID-19 is part of the coronavirus family, which is also the same family as the common cold. So people have been researching coronaviruses for a long time. So what I would say is, I mean, I personally will take the vaccine when it's offered to staff at St George's Hospital, because I think to myself, I have a duty to keep my patients safe. And I don't know if I may carry it asymptomatically. And of course, even though I wear a mask and patients wear masks, I don't want to pass it on to them. And I believe that if the vaccine is rolled out effectively, if the uptake is there, because if people don't take it up, we are not going to be able to find ourselves in a position where we can sort of get rid of this virus anytime soon. But I do believe that if it's rolled out properly and if people take it up when it's available to them, I do think we will see a huge shift. And I'd like to think by next summer, if I'm honest. And I think we have to hold on to hope. And if anybody watching this is struggling with feeling positive right now, is feeling anxious, is feeling down, is feeling like we're going into Christmas and it all feels very dark, please, please know this will get better. We will enter a better time. Just hold tight and things will get better. And if it may not seem like that now, I think the vaccine is particularly good news, but from a Labour Party point of view, we must scrutinise everything, make sure it's fair and equitable, and we need to keep an eye on any adverse reactions and side effects and things like that. But I do think it will mean that we can travel again, we can see our loved ones, so I'm keeping everything crossed and feeling hopeful.
Great. And do you what do you have to say to those who fall under the spell of the anti-vax movements and the sort of conspiracy theorists, the 5G types?
Look, I welcome free thought. I welcome free speech. I think everybody is entitled to their opinions. But what I think about movements like that, that they're incredibly damaging to our communities. And I think that the amount of death, I mean, over 60,000 deaths, that is, and just an extraordinary number of loved ones across the country that have died. Every single person that's died has left a family in mourning. So the numbers affected are huge, not to mention long COVID, people absolutely traumatized as well by weeks and weeks in intensive care. So for people to go out there and preach hatred about a vaccine, to talk about conspiracies to inject things into our body to control us, I think it's incredibly selfish. Let people take an informed approach. Let people do their research about the vaccine and come to their own conclusions. Don't put ideas in their heads about how unsafe it is, because people that do that have to be able to hold themselves responsible for people dying as well. Because unless a critical number of people take this vaccine, our communities won't ultimately be safe. So I would say, look, of course people are entitled to their opinions, but keep them to yourselves where they could cause damage for our communities and make people feel scared and vulnerable.
There was a situation not long ago that I don't know whether you've seen this reflected on the wards, Rosena, but with the scares about the MMR vaccine.
Yes.
And the fact that measles has now come back and is causing in utero deaths and blindness and other things. Have you seen that happening on the wards?
Yeah. I see that in A&E regularly, where, I mean, over the years, actually, where people have come in. I remember very vividly just a few years ago, multiple conversations with mothers, because actually part of the screening, like questions that we ask when anyone comes into A&E, like with their child, is your child up to date for vaccinations? What was the birth like? And often there were mothers say, like mothers and fathers saying, no, we don't vaccinate our child. We just feed them good food, fruit and vegetables, and no, we don't believe in that. And saying, well, you have to understand that they could get very ill. Well, they'll be fine. Well, they're not fine, are they? Because they're here ill. So there really is a place for vaccinations. But the scaremongering about MMR causing autism, in fact, my dissertation of my first degree was looking at autism and the link between MMR and autism, and not actually.
You're even more of an expert than I thought then.
But it's just so interesting having conversations with parents who really have bought into that, and actually that is people from the very top creating a lot of hype and scaring people. And I think that people inherently want to do what's best for their children, but if they're being told that what's best is to not give them this vaccination, and then they're coming in a couple of years later with really sick children, many dying. We've had many deaths from measles as well. It is a very serious disease, and a lack of uptake of the vaccine has caused there to be a rise in measles cases, which has had a very, very detrimental effect to babies in utero, to children who are young and particularly vulnerable, and it is damaging. Look, of course people are going to have differences of opinion, and of course it's for anybody to do their research themselves, as I said, but scaremongering and whipping up a fearful frenzy helps no one. And I hope to God that these people who clearly have been unaffected by the coronavirus, haven't lost anyone, don't know what it's like to have seen the person you love most in the whole world packed off in an ambulance, waving goodbye, oh, I'll meet you at the hospital, and then you never see them again. I'm glad they haven't had to go through that, but so many people have, and they should have a heart.
That's great. Now we've got a couple of questions coming up about Brexit. Funnily enough, I don't know how that might have occurred, and clearly anyone else who's got any other questions don't have to be about what we've just talked about that wishes to ask Rosena. Please put them in the Q&A. So first, can we have Graham, who's a new member, I think.
Hi, Graham.
Hi, yeah, thanks. Good evening. And my question was really just to ask, with the prospect out there of some kind of Brexit deal, maybe, what would need to be in the deal or not be in it to get Labour to vote for it in the Commons if it gets that far? I'm just sort of looking at what needs to be there. What would the red lines be for us?
That's interesting. I think the way it stands at the moment is if a deal comes back, we will look at it in detail before deciding exactly, what we like, how we would vote. And I think, all of the things that we wanted, like workers' rights and protections, has to be in there. But actually, we have to accept that we are leaving. We are left. It's a done deal. It's not about revisiting the issue of whether we are going to return to Europe, whether it was a good or bad thing. We accept that Brexit, it has happened, but the discussion as to whether I think it's pretty clear that we're not going to vote against it, but the discussion as to whether we would abstain or vote for it is still very much a discussion because we haven't seen what's in it. There's also a conversation about the fact that they may not bring it back for an up-down yes-no vote. It might be actually a vote on the process rather than a straight, like, are we voting for the deal or not kind of vote. So that may seem a bit vague, but that's because I don't have all the answers, because it is an ever-moving feast. But I know that Rachel Reeves is on top of it, following it as closely as she can, and we have really regular discussions as a shadow cabinet about the best way forward. But I know that this is a tough one. This is a tough one for Labour to navigate, because it's very difficult to feel like you are fighting for something that is best for your communities, that isn't going to make them worse off, but also understanding that we are leaving and we can't frustrate that process as well, because that in and of itself could be very, very damaging as well. And we know that a no deal is the very worst outcome. So it's actually a tough one to navigate, and it's an ever-moving feast. I don't know if Angela has any thoughts on that.
Yeah, and I'll bring the next question in, who's going to maybe want to respond to that in a minute. But I think we have to remember that the economy this year is 11.5% smaller than it was at the beginning of the year because of the effects of the pandemic. And when we look at the Office for Budget Responsibility's forecast, which came out with the spending review a week or so ago, they forecast what the effect of no deal would be. And they reckon that having no deal will cost us another 2% of permanent loss of gross domestic product. So that's 2% less for the NHS, 2% less for absolutely everything else. Also likely to lose a lot of jobs, as we're beginning to see. I think it's important as well, and I'll bring the next Graham in a minute, just to remember that when the referendum was fought, all of the people who are now advocating for what they call a clean break or an Australian deal, which means WTO terms and no deal, were actually telling people before they voted that they were never going to think about leaving the single market, and that having a deal once we'd left the European Union would be the simplest thing to organise in history. It's not proved to be that way, and I think a lot of what the Labour Party's got to do in the next period is show that this is the Conservatives' choice, their lies, their mess. And although we do not want to see our country suffer, they've made political decisions which have put us in this position. But Graham, there's another Graham who wants to ask a question on this subject of Brexit. So Graham, you're on. If you actually,
right.
The constant thing that I have to say these days, you're muted, but you're not muted. Go on, Graham.
Graham.
Thanks, Rosena. Yeah, my question was along similar lines to Graham Cooper's. I think it's really important, that the Conservatives get to own the mess that they're created on Brexit. But given the report that's come out today with regard to how the party's doing with regard to the lost red wall seats, how do we? I'm just wondering in terms of what kind, if we do vote for, or if we abstain, what impact is that going to have on the prospect of getting those seats back, in time for the next election?
Thank you, Graham. See, that is the $1 million question, and I think one of the things that we regularly ask ourselves is the 2024 election going to be won or lost over Brexit? And it's almost as though the 2019 was the Brexit election. And the case that we need to make in 2024 for everybody in the red wall seats and all over the country, because we have a mountain to climb to win, in 2024. We have to win back seats that we lost in 2015 and even before that. So fundamentally, our job in 2024 is to make people understand that their lives will be materially better under a Labour government, and why. And if we abstain, we're not frustrating the process. We will still leave, and we're not voting against the deal. But some people argue that if we vote for the deal, and if we know it will make our communities worse off, we've got our hands all over it, which would make it harder to criticise in 2024. Whereas other people say, well, we've lost trust anyway, we should vote for the deal because that will get all the red wall seats back. But I'm not entirely sure it would, because unless we do a huge campaign with a mail drop and say, hi everybody, we've voted for this, we're now not against Brexit, which we're just not going to do. Like the Daily Mail are not going to do big front page covers. They're not going to support us. They're not going to get us those voters back. So I think the real question is other than Brexit, what do we do between now and 2024 to prove that people can put their trust back in the Labour Party? But also, what are we going to do in Scotland? What are we going to prove to the to the Scots? And I think when we talk about whether we abstain and or vote in favour, and I'm not here trying to advocate one or the other, I'm just sort of putting the arguments across in terms of how we think about them and discuss them at the moment. Let's bear in mind that in Scotland, so many of them wanted to remain in the EU. So it's very, very difficult when we try and strike a balance between what abstaining and voting for a deal would do in terms of narrative to try and win back people that we've lost. And I think more importantly, we need to think about what, except for Brexit, is going to make us win the trust back.
Great, thanks, Rosena. And I think it's always sobering to look at the arithmetic. Everybody knows that the Conservatives have got an 80 majority, so whatever they decide to whip for, they're going to be able to get. But when you look at the relative size of the Parliamentary Labour Party to the Parliamentary Conservative Party, I'm afraid there are 164 more Conservative MPs than there are Labour MPs. And that means we have to increase the size of the Parliamentary Labour Party by 60% to win with a majority of 1 at the next election. And we won't do that, in my view, without having done a lot of work on our vision for how our society will look in the future, how we can deal with the huge economic crisis that will become even more apparent in the early part of next year, and what our vision for renewing our society actually is. And that's the work we've got to do. Tom, I'm going to bring you in now, and I think that you were an active member of Rosena's deputy leadership campaign.
Tom, hello, Tom.
Hello. Yes,
I
I was.
You, mate. I miss you.
Thank you. Yeah. So what I wanted to ask was about going back to the vaccines again. So off the topic of Brexit, which I think for some people is disappointing, for others is very relieving. But yeah, off the topic of Brexit onto vaccines is what questions have been asked of the government thus far on what they're doing to pressure social media companies to actually deal with the fake news that is we're already seeing and we're going to continue to see grow and grow on sites like Facebook and Twitter.
Yeah. So which companies did you say? So I missed that
Facebook and Twitter, but particularly Facebook, as we know, Nick Clegg's a big fan of free speech and not a fan of taking it down. But
yeah. Well, actually, I know that this is something that the DCMS team are talking to us in the health team about. So I'm not exactly privy at this time to what plans they have. I know it's something that has been taken incredibly seriously, but I'm very happy to go after this and ask Joe Stevens if they have a strategy for that, because it's so important, and we are raising it when we can on the floor of the House. And I know that many colleagues on the front bench and back bench are raising it when they can. But in regard to specific questions asked of the government, I wouldn't be able to tell you that. But I can go and ask Joe Stevens and then get back to you. If you just want to drop me a DM on Twitter to remind me of your details, I can certainly ask her. I hope that's all right.
And last but by no means least, as we're approaching the hour, and I think it's been fascinating, John, you've got a question. It's on a similar issue, I think.
Hello, Rosena. Yes.
Hi, John.
Just on that point, I mean, like Tom was saying, there's been an awful lot of stuff out there on social media, various types. I'm not on it myself partly for that reason. I mean, you get Trumpisms like comparing the thalidomide drug to the vaccine, and then you get other stories like my wife's been very worried about with a story that's going around that's saying Europeans with settled status are going to have proper certificated ID to show that they are settled when they come back into the country off holiday or visiting home, and the government isn't prepared to issue anything like this. I've seen nothing out there like that myself, and it does bother me because of the amount of upset it's causing people and the mental impact that it causes.
And John, certainly when I was talking to the CCG, our local health service, a couple of days ago, it's been very noticeable. They were telling me that there's been a big increase in demand for mental health services locally in the past period. So Rosena, I don't know whether you've got any final observations as we're approaching the end of our hour's session.
Yeah, well, I think I mean, this has been absolutely fascinating, but the issues that we have had presented to us in the last year, both with regards to the coronavirus pandemic, ongoing austerity, issues like being asked about, potentially being asked about like certificates, all the sorts of things that are causing horrific uncertainty, have without a doubt caused what I believe to be a second pandemic, which is a mental health pandemic. And the Centre for Mental Health have done a incredible report that shows, just as a result of the pandemic alone, up to 10 million people, so 8.5 million adults and 1.5 million children, are going to need access to mental health services. This is on top of the crisis that we already had. Let's not forget that mental health and mental health services were already in dire straits long before the pandemic. So I think the best thing we can do collectively is to share stories like this so that we can all keep an eye out for it, keep our ears to the ground, find out the local pressures, and keep on feeding them back to me as well, so I can use them in my interventions, so I can bring your messages to the floor of the House, because I can't be your voice without your messages. So please stay in touch. I'm here for you, and it's an absolute honour to know you and to be here tonight. And I hope that I can come and see you again soon when this pandemic is over and I've had my vaccine and the country's returned to normal.
Fantastic, Rosena, and I'd like to thank you for taking the time to spend with us tonight in our inaugural
brilliant. It's been absolutely brilliant.
webinar. And I'd like to thank all the members of the Wallasey Party who've given up their time to be here too, and also for the questions that you've asked. As
Brilliant.
I say, we will make a recording of this available and we'll send that round. So those of you who want to evangelise about how good Rosena is and how lucky we are to have her on the front bench can do so. And thank you very, very much for joining.
It's an honour.
First
Brilliant.
ever webinar. You'll be our inaugural speaker forever. And we will definitely take you up on that offer to come in real life when we're allowed, when life and real life gets back to normal. So thank you so much. Very much, Rosena. Stay safe, everybody, and let's do another one of these. Meanwhile, if I don't get to see any of you in the meantime, have a great Christmas and stay safe.
Thank you so much.
Cheers.